About Arlo Belshee. Arlo is has a 20-year legacy code in DevOps and has a passion for zero bugs. He's going to talk today about preventing rewrites and what is the effort that we make to actually create organizations that actually can migrate from code to code without any hassle. Arlo, welcome to the stage. The stage is all yours. Let's welcome him with a round of applause.
Thank you. All right, so good to chat with you today. I will be available after this and throughout for any ongoing conversations. My hope is this talk will bring up a number of ideas, cause a number of questions, and lead to some conversations. So I'm going to introduce some stuff. First, I want to talk about preventing rewrites. So what I'm talking about is, of course, that moment when we all decide that the software is so terrible and needs to be so different that it's time to rewrite it. Right. And there are two sort of times when that happens. One is when the business has changed so dramatically that what we've created is no longer useful. You know, we're still very often before product market fit, and that product didn't work. That customer isn't interested. We're going totally different. Okay? So those, I would not consider those to be rewrites for the purpose of this conversation, because we're not rewriting the same software. Right? We're creating a brand new product. Right. Then there's another set where we're trying to fundamentally work with the same sort of people and bring the same sort of value, but there's some technological reason that it has failed, and that's the kind of thing that we want to prevent. So in order to prevent it, first we have to understand where it comes from. Come on, there we go. All right, so the source of all rewrites. Source of all rewrites is there's a shining house on the hill. There is an ideal state that we see that we would love to be in. And between us and that is a festering swamp that is impenetrable, impassable, and we don't know how to get there. Right? If we knew how to get through the swamp, then we would just ride the rails. We would follow that incremental path, and we would get to the shining house on the hill. Life would be good, right? That's the dream. Now, the dream rarely exists. The truth is, we're actually in a state a little more like this. It's an impenetrable swamp, but there is a path. And that path is known to very few. There are a small number of people who can look at that impenetrable swamp and see, there's a path right there, that hillock. And then we turn this way, and then we go turn around, and then whatever, but we can get there. And there are a large number of people who don't know how to see that path. And this is the difference between rewrites and refactoring, remodeling, a bunch of different things, a bunch of different terms that all mean an incremental way to get there. So let's look at what causes people to see that path. And to do that, we have to ask, what is a swamp? When I ask people what a swamp is, especially in a coding context, like half of us, our experience with a swamp is it's a mud pit that we fall into and get very, very angry, and it pulls us down, right? And that this is what our code base is like. And then you ask some set of people, what is a swamp? And they say, it is the most biodiverse biome on the planet. Has more species than anywhere else. It can grow anything. It is the healthiest thing that exists. And that's also true. Right? And the same is true about legacy code. What is our legacy code? It is a festering swamp, a mud pit that pulls us down and drags us down and prevents us from doing what we want to do. Or it is the source of the entire growth of everything that this company has done. It is a repository of all knowledge that we have of our customers, what they want. It is our heritage, and it is our legacy going forward. And it is both of those things. It's a matter of perspective. This perspective leads to two fundamental ways of working. Right? And I'm borrowing a term. I'm calling these makers and menders. Right? Many people are makers. They see the job of programming as the creation of new things. Right? I improve behavior, and generally, this is a festering swamp. I want to touch it as little as possible and have it touch me as little as possible, so I maintain it. I try and make it no worse, right? Minimally invasive changes, and then write net new code. Right? That's the maker way. Right? As a result, they end up making big, bold bets. They have big innovations, and they figure out how to land this big, transformative idea into the code base. They're always telling the code, hey, code, do this. Right? Here's the next thing you do. I tell you what to do. Right? Menders are an entirely different mindset. These are the people who see the biodiversity. Right? They specialize at changing existing things. It's not about what you can create, it's about what you can grow from what is already there. Right? They tend to preserve the behavior of the system. They're not actually very good at making it do new things. What they're really good at is improving the structure and making it be able to grow new things. They make these tiny invisible steps that no one even sees. They ask the code, what would you like to be when you grow up? Right? And they make that possible. It's a more reflective, responsive, instead of imperative approach to coding. We have this myth, those of us who have seen these people in the wild, there's sort of these two mindsets about what they're like, right? Makers, we see those as the premier makers of the company. They're impactful. They are innovators. They are the ones who have these amazing ideas, and over the course of a weekend of hacking, they make it come to be. They bring new value into fruition, and they're amazing. Menders. They are time wasters. They are gold plating. They are invisible, hidden. They're the ones that always want to take your feature that should take 2 weeks and make it take 4, just to make the code better. Right? This is the myth and belief that we have around the two. The reality is that it's a little more like this. Makers play offense. Menders play defense. The outcomes are, with makers, they take shots on goal. Right? And when you take a shot on goal, either you score or you lose the ball. Right? They're taking a risk. They're the ones who win the game. Right? Menders, they maintain possession. Right? They prevent the opponent points. They create shot opportunities. They're able to get the ball up from the backfield to the strikers, to the makers. They create the opportunities, and they ensure you don't lose the game, but they don't win it for you. Right? Menders are about capturing value. Makers are about preventing risk and creating possibility. Right? They protect all your existing revenue, while the makers are going out and creating new revenue. Right? So, leads to an interesting question. Which is more visible, menders or makers? I see everyone shrug, which means you're all saying makers. Yeah, makers are a lot more visible. Right? The goal you score is a lot more visible than the 50 goals that the opponent didn't score. Right? So deep experts in the game, if you look at football, deep experts in the game, the coaches who are running teams, how do they balance? Right? Coaches see the value of goal prevention, and they have a significant number of people on the field who are there to prevent goals. Right? And then they have some people who aren't. Right? Interested external stakeholders, which are owners, fans, those sorts of people, they only see the goals scored. Right? So what would happen if we allowed interested external stakeholders, owners, fans, consumers of the game, to set strategy and hiring? Well, if fans ran hiring, this is what the field would look like. And the game would be more exciting. Right? How many more goals would be scored this way? Right? And now, what if fans not only ran hiring, but they ran the rules of the game? They would see there is a constraint limiting the scoring here. Let's remove that constraint and give everyone a ball. Now scores will be really, really high. Right? And lots of companies are in that state. They are, quote, 99%, 0.9%. I'm totally making up that number. Right? I will own that that is a BS metric. But it feels about right. Most of the people employed by most companies are makers. They are hired for their ability to win points, to make new revenue, to create value. Agile talks about we are out there to create value. Let's focus on value. Value, 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 value. Maker. Right? The result, if you run a group this way, is that you have very low time of possession. You keep shooting goals, right? And you keep getting some and missing some, right? The game is out of your control, and it feels out of control. Adding new revenue erodes existing revenue. I get a new capability, and I break something that's already there, right? External forces are always fighting me. There's always somebody at the other end of the pitch who's got his own ball and is scoring points against me, and I have to run faster than he does, right? So I'm running very fast just to stay in place. Feel familiar? Now, of course, we're all thinking at this point, yeah, that's exhausting. It's also totally outside of my control. I'm a developer. What the hell can I do about that? Right? Fair. So what if I learned to mend some? Right? Now, I'm not talking about changing the company. I'm not talking about stopping being a maker. I'm talking about expanding to also have some mending capabilities. Right. Now, benefits and detriments to this. You'll become a fairly unique resource. If the company is 99.9% makers and you're the only mender, you are unique. You will stand out. And in fact, the menders that we tend to see them at the more senior positions. When we look at what makes a principal developer, what makes a technical architect, a lot of the difference there is they're able to work with the system that we have. They see a vision for how we can start here and get somewhere. Mender abilities. Right? So big advantages. Job security. Mending is harder for AI than making. Right? Both will eventually die. But mending will last longer. And the reason it lasts longer is because to make, you only need to know what you want. To mend, you need to know what you want and the entire state and history of all that has come before. That context is hard. Right? Now, there are some problems. Right? Mending abilities, it's going to be hard to learn, and it's going to be hard to do, because you won't have a lot of organizational support. Organizations tend to be still focused on making value delivery, this quarter's numbers, all of those sorts of things. And you are fighting that as you start to develop mender abilities. So you somewhat have to find a way to either get a pocket of support or to do it on your own. Right? We'll talk about both of those. Right? You're going to get blocked in actually doing your work. Right? Because of the myth that's out there of you are a time waster. Right? Even if you end up producing at the same rate, very often what very experienced menders will do is they will refactor the existing code to make the change easy, and then they will make the easy change. Where have I heard that before? Right? But the result of doing that is that everyone looks at what you do and they say, in the first day you didn't ship a change. You just spent the day making the code prettier. Waste of time. I'm done with you. All right. And of course, there's less job security because what you do is invisible. Right? So you're going to have to do constant self-promotion. And yes, I put job security on both sides, right? Because it's true. So if we're talking about making and mending, hopefully I have convinced some of you that it's interesting to become menders. The rest of this talk is going to be talking about how to become a mender very effectively. So if at this point you're not interested in becoming a mender, then law of defeat, I welcome you to find a tent that is going to provide you more value. Right? And that is an honest offer. And for those of you who are interested in looking at how you might bring in some more mender capabilities, let's dive into that. So in becoming more of a mender, right, there are three fundamental kinds of problems to solve as I'm working with people working with code. The first is there's unalignment. Like, how many people have had these endless conversations about permission to refactor, about what's our strategy? Should we do feature flags? Or should we spend our time on doing TDD? Or should we do improve our APIs? Or, oh, we can't improve our APIs because we have crappy cohesion in the code, or crappy coupling, and we need to improve our boundaries between classes. Or should we, or should we, or should we, and I can't even read the damn code base anyway, so we need to improve the names, right? Everyone has different ideas. There are too many good ideas, and we have these endless conversations. We are unaligned. Right? The next big problem to solve is, even if we're aligned, making change is unnatural. It's too hard. All I want to do is, in this code base and with this set of people, let's write all of our tests first and have all of our tests be arrange, act, assert, or context, action, verification, right? Nothing else. Not using Gherkin, just using our coding language, but expressing everything in the customer's intent, right? Clearly readable to a non-programmer. Let's just go do that right now. It's clearly the right way to go. GFL in most code bases, right? Ain't going to happen. Right? It is unnatural right now. Right? And then the other is, of course, and even if we were to get there, it'll all backslide anyway. I've got management support right now, and managers change. Sometimes I get a new manager, and sometimes my manager changes, right? Either way, things alter, and everything backslides and erodes, right? It's not sticky. Right? So we need to solve each of these problems. I have a solution for each of these problems. So for each of these problems, I'm going to suggest a tool that can help and a recipe, a way to use that tool that can help. So the first one, if we're unaligned, I've created a set of context maps. These are maps of many paths through the swamp that have been found to work well. I will not state that I have found all of the paths. I will state that I have written down the paths that I know about, and I am continuing to extend these maps. Right? I'm also not done even writing down any one of these paths. Right? There will be lots more to come. But they map out the terrain, routes that people have gone before, and allow you to have a conversation about that. Right? And then there's a recipe of how do we navigate. Assume we have a map, great, nice to have a map. Now, still have to get through the swamp. What do we do? The next problem, it's unnatural. Right? Well, let's talk about how we can make it natural. Supporting contexts are the tool, and we talk about contexts and behaviors. We'll actually talk about that a bit in the maps, but then we're going to apply that here with a recipe of gradualism. Right? And gradualism has been gradually created by myself, Llewellyn, several others, bouncing ideas slowly amongst us over years and years, and I've now written it down. This is the first time that I've written it down, which means I guarantee it doesn't even agree amongst all of us, nor is it right. But it's getting there, right? And it's useful. Right? And the last thing is, it all backslide. Again, it comes back to contexts. We're going to talk about that. And we're going to do, the key tool here is to do a context transition, an integration. And I have a recipe for what does it mean to integrate a transformation. So let's first talk about alignment. Endless discussions. So navigation is the solution. Using legacy escape maps. This is a small portion of such a map. Right? And it allows you to pick your path. It allows you to sequence your technical shifts, figure out what you're going to do when, so that everyone can understand why we're doing this now and when we're doing the thing that they really are interested in doing. Right? Or why we're not doing the thing they're really interested in doing, and get on board with yeah, that's actually off strategy and wouldn't help us. Right? And it allows interdependent team progress that's semi-independent. Right? Teams can go at their own pace. They don't have to be in lockstep with everybody else. And cross-team collaboration is possible, and teams can bring each other up. Right? Interdependent team progress. So I've created a set of maps. Mine are at technicalfluency.com. Those are in beta right now, and as I mentioned, I am far from done writing them, but I am going to continue writing them there. And you are all welcome to either have conversations with me and get some things onto that one, or create your own maps and let me know about them. So here's an example argument, the too many good ideas argument. Right? This is what we want to do to solve all of our technical problems. Right? It could be that every one of these will solve the problem. It is very likely that every one of these will solve a problem that is relevant and important. Right? At one point when I was working at Tableau, we ran a survey. We went to the 120-ish teams that were all independently working on different parts of our monolith, and we asked them to tell us what are the top 3 biggest problems, risks, scariest things, however you want to describe it, that give you problems, right? Bother you or give you troubles, right? And which are the top 3 that you control? Which are the top 3 that are outside of your control you need someone else to fix? Right? We then clustered all of those with as loose of a cluster as we could, and started getting some numbers. And we found that the median problem, not even solution, but the median problem was selected by one team. More than half of the problems affected only one team. The most widespread agreement on a problem, out of 126 teams, there were 6 teams that agreed it was a problem. Of those 6, 3 said it was their problem, 3 said it was a management problem that they needed someone else to fix. Right? Now, assume that I am the chief architect, or I am the CTO, or I am the director of development, and I am trying to make life better for my team. I get this data. What strategy do I choose? Any problem that I say we're going to do, one team will say, yes, thank you. And 125 teams will say, what are you smoking? Right? So what we're going to do is navigate. All right. Navigation recipe, it's like this. Here's how we navigate that conversation. We first distinguish context from behavior. We pick a goal. We ground our current context, describe where we're at right now, including what's not on context and variations. We'll talk about that in a moment. We pick a path. We determine, and then we define the terms by our context, because there are a lot of terms that differ. Right? So let's look at distinguishing context and behavior. And this is a core that I mentioned. It shows up in a bunch of these recipes. Right? The difference between a context and a behavior. So a behavior, action performed by an individual using a tool. And here I mean the specific action. Right? We talk about extract method. We talk about refactoring. Right? And do people refactor or not? That's not a behavior. We talk about extract method. OK, forget all the other things about refactoring. Do you extract methods or not? Right, that's not a behavior. When you go to extract method, what do? Do you go, huh, what are you talking about? That's a behavior. Right? Do you cut and paste and modify code? That's a behavior. Do you use the Imdine Lambda-based recipe that you can find in the provable refactories cookbook? That's a different behavior. Do you use control RM in your IDE? That's a different behavior. Right? All of these are different behaviors that have different results. Right? What's the risk of extract method? Well, the value is pretty much the same, independent of which of the last three approaches you do. But the risk is totally different. If I am going to extract my method by cutting, paste, and modifying code, there are any number of ways I can screw that up. And those will cost me time to fix, or I might not see the problem, and if my test coverage isn't good enough, or whatever else. Right? If I do it by the inline lambda-based recipe, then I'm following this rigorous recipe, which is based on using type safety in languages that support that. TypeScript, it's great. C++, it's great. C#, it's not necessary. Java, it's not necessary, but it would work in those things. JavaScript, doesn't work. The tooling isn't there. Right? So the risk profile varies depending on your context there. Right? Control RM, where it exists, is very safe, except that that's also been extended to some languages where it can't do it safely. You know, extract method in Python, well, many of the IDEs provide it. They just don't guarantee the same guarantees that they do when you run it in Java. Right? And so you have to, again, know. Right? So that's what I mean by behavior. It's exactly what do you do and how do you do it. Right? Context. The context is the emergent state that results from a lot of people doing whatever behaviors they're doing, but they tend to be consistent over time. The same people tend to do the same kinds of behaviors. Those behaviors tend to get influenced by the behaviors of the people around them. And so you see this emergent state. Right? You don't end up with chaos. You end up with some emergent context. Right? And for this example, is refactoring safe and easy? Well, depending on which specific behaviors you have around extract method and rename and introduce parameter object and check-in. Like what constitutes check-in? What is the commit bar? How do you indicate that? How often do people commit? What happens at that point? All of these things will determine the safety level of refactoring. Right? What is the risk profile of it? And given that, if you are in an environment, in a context in which refactoring is safe, it's easy, people just do it naturally, you get one set of value return. You get one set of reinforcement for behaviors. And if you are in an environment in which refactoring is not safe, it is not easy, you will have very different conversations about should I refactor. Right? You'll get very different influences on behavior. So that's the important thing. Contexts strongly determine behaviors. Behaviors emerge from contexts. Or excuse me, contexts emerge from behaviors, right? It's a cycle. So we're going to start first by distinguishing context and behaviors. For the thing that we're working on right now, let's know the difference, and let's be able to identify a few of the things. Which is this? Is this a behavior or is it a context? Right. Then we're going to pick a goal. Right. So picking goal, I'm coming over here to my maps. Assume that my goal is breaking up a monolith. right? This is the map that I have created. Now, I'm working with a team right now. I thought, hey, let's go ahead and apply these and bring it in. And the first goal they chose was improving cycle time. So I don't have a map for that. All right, we're working on creating the map for that. All right. So the key thing to understand there is the map is not the same for every goal. Right. This is a map that's based on my understanding of how do we start with monolithic releases that are a pain, and get to the point where we can have high-frequency, semi-independent, interdependent code deploys and even releases across an organization. All right. So that's the goal that this fake group has decided, and they are going to go look at this map. So the next thing that we do is we ground the current context. So we look over here, and we just start understanding at a context level which ones of these are true for us and which are not. Right? Because it's not that we're in one context. It's that our context is the union of a number of different things. Right? Can we build separate pieces of code independently or not? You know, what does it mean? How would we measure that? And for each one of these, there are measures that you can measure of the system as a whole to see, you know, are you there? Do you have that? Is that something that you can rely on, or is that something that you would aspire to? Right? Do you have backwards compatibility? Is code consistently backwards compatible? Are APIs consistently backwards compatible? Is there a map between the producers of code and the consumers of code so that producers know who is consuming their code and consumers know all of the code that they're consuming, right? And they can communicate? Or is that invisible and must be figured out every time by people reading the code and working with the most knowledgeable senior architects around the organization? Right? All of these things are aspects of context. Right? And so you look through this and you start identifying which ones of these are true for me. Where am I at? Right? Because contexts act as gravity. Now, if I have a uniform development environment, refactoring is safe, cheap, and easy, and I've got excellent unit testing, I'm already in that state. I'm in a very different state from a group that doesn't have all of that, but does have the ability to build independently. And when I start talking about bringing in TDD and using it to verify not just correctness at the local level, but we're going to generate our spec from our test. We're going to manage the design documentation and spec documentation as part of the testing system, right? For the one group, their test system is pulling that behavior forward. It's gravity that's bringing that in and making that easy. For the other group, their existing context is gravity pulling them away from that, right? So the difference between between a system eroding and a system healing is merely perspective. Right? Is that different behavior generating the spec from the tests, is that something that's inside the natural gravity well of the system, and so bringing that forward heals, right? And people failing to test, well, that gets healed and brought into test, right? Or is that an invader from the outside, and the natural gravity of our system causes that to erode, right? So we're going to ground the current context. Right? Last thing, we'll pick a path. Come on, come on. There we go. Okay, so you will note, if I go all the way over here, there are actually multiple ways to get to ship without synchronizing. Right? I could do the DevOps path. Focus on telemetry, focus on feature flags, focus on dark releases, focus on all of those things that are created in the DevOps ship from one branch sort of approach, trunk-based development. That whole style is a path, right? And it's got a set of capabilities and techniques. There's a clean boundaries path. That one focuses on let's get our code in a really good state where we have high cohesion, low coupling, good design, right? And we're able to substitute pieces out back and forth, and we're able to do managed calls between people, right? And at that point, I can swap things in and out very easily, right? And I can, again, ship without synchronizing. There's an entire path that goes through that. Right? There's another path that's the monorepo path. Right? I see this at Google. Right? where Google says we're going to ship constantly without synchronizing by simply making it so that everyone is able to edit safely, effectively, and correctly the entire Google code base at any moment. Right? And so I want to do a refactoring. I just pop open my refactoring scripting engine, and I execute it, and it runs across the however many lines of code are in the entire Google factory. And I don't just extract a method. I will do this transformation in, 4,000 different products. Right? That's the monorepo path. And it's a very different approach, but gets you to the same goal. Right? So you need to pick which of these you're on, because constantly, like at a client that I'm working with right now, there are a bunch of people who are talking about bringing in feature flagging and a set of directors that are pushing for, we need feature flagging and the ability to do dark releases, while there are another set of directors that are saying, our biggest problem is we can't verify everything will work together because several of you have exited the monolith, and we need to figure out how to be effective as a monolith. And they don't even realize that the two strategies that they're talking about prevent each other. You can't do both of those things well at the same time. Right? So you need to be able to make choices about what are we going to do and why, what's the relevant path that we're going to follow, and then that will tell us what changes we're going to make. Right? So at that point, we've now finished the recipe. Right? At this point, we should have resolved that conversation about the bajillion ideas, because we have a path, we know where we're at. Our next step is the next things on that next step. And if we were working on making refactoring safe and easy, then we can open up the multiple behaviors that are related to making refactoring safe and easy, and we can work on those behaviors, right? And not other things. Yet. OK, so there's a different argument. Permission to refactor. I want to refactor. It's not safe. Right? People are thinking various different things. And it's a very similar recipe. Here we're focusing on grounding the current context, picking the path, and defining the terms by context. Because the real problem here is that both of these two people are right. Refactoring is safe. Refactoring is not safe. And they're both right depending on which context they're in. If you are sitting over here with safe and easy refactoring, where this is what you mean and the behaviors that are consistently happening across your team, then when someone wants to refactor, they're actually making these tiny safe changes. They're automatically verified. They have bug-for-bug compatibility, which means they're using static analysis and other things to verify correctness, which means that even if there are no tests, they're known safe. Right. Forget that I didn't test the thing I want. It's like, I know that I could not have altered behavior that I didn't even think to look for because of the way that I'm doing this. Now I'm limiting myself in my refactorings. There are a much smaller set that I can do these proofs on, right? But that small set, I can do a tremendous amount with by composing them over and over. And if I've gotten risk to 0 and I've got static analysis that verifies that, then now that composition chain is very, very safe and can be made very, very fast. If, however, I'm not in that context, if when I say refactor, what I mean is copy, paste, and modify, then the manager is right. We need to choose when to refactor. We need to choose what to refactor. Right? So the term refactor and remodel and all of these, and TDD, depends on where you are, exactly what context. Is TDD, does it do design damage, or does it allow you to find all the problems with your design and improve them? Yes. Depends on the context. So let's carry on. Over here. There we are. Another argument. Yeah, TDD, TDD, TDD. This is that one. What is the effect of TDD? Well, depends on your context. It's all of these effects. So again, the recipe, very simple. Ground the context, define the terms. All right, so this is the overall navigation recipe. All right, it's those 5 steps, and it will resolve through any particular conversation. As you saw, different conversations use different subsets of the recipe. Now, that's normal. Right? But I encourage you, use a recipe like this to have those conversations, right? And you get out of them. So let's talk about making change natural. Gradualism. So this is it. Gradualism is about I don't do one thing and then the next thing. Instead, I do everything crappily, then I do everything slightly less crappily, and I keep going until it's not crappy anymore, it's just kind of bad, and then it's good enough, and then I stop. And it never gets to good. In legacy code, good is too expensive. We don't get to good. We get to slightly less terrible than it was before until it's tolerable, right? And then we keep going, right? And so that is gradualism, right? If I'm trying to make refactoring safe and cheap, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so that we're living in both contexts simultaneously. I've resolved the gravity problem. We'll talk about that. So that gravity is no longer pulling us backwards, right? It might not be pulling us forwards as much as we want, but it's no longer pulling us backwards. It's at least neutral. That's that 50%. Get the context to be half present, right? And then we will make small progress on a whole set of things at once that reinforce each other, right? And then a whole set of things at once that reinforce each other, and we keep going. The recipe, here's an example hard change. We want to do good unit testing with all of those things, but we have untestable code, right? It's not going to work very well. So gradualism, first we do one context at a time. Now this recipe, or this hard change, the not obvious thing here is you're actually trying to cross multiple contexts at once. That's why people fail at it. People try this all the time, and then they try and write good, clean tests, but they don't yet even have the ability to do refactoring safely and cheaply. And if you don't have that, then you're caught in this catch-22 of should I refactor the code? I can't refactor because I don't have test support, and I can't write tests because the code is untestable. SOL, right? However, if you have refactoring safe, cheap, and easy, and it doesn't require test support, there's no problem. So do this at one context at a time. And then the next thing is you blend the contexts, right? And so you look at, for every pair of contexts here, how do I make it so that I'm in both the state where refactoring is safe and cheap and the state where it isn't at the same time? Right. And that requires a technical solution to a technical problem. It's a good thing we have some technical people in the room, right? Every pair of contexts requires a hack. How can I make it be true even before it's true? Right? What does it really mean to be living in that context, and how can I get that to be the case even though it's not really the case? How can I get to the point where I have everything ready to do dark releases, but I don't have the ability to do them yet? How can I get it so I have pseudo-dark releases before I have dark releases? Right? Maybe I have dark releases, but only to staging. But I've got them there. I can work on that. Right? So that's the gradualism recipe. Come on. Oh, back here. Yeah, so we want a trivial form for every behavior. We make three, like for this one, I'm getting started here. I'm going to make 3 tiny changes. Here's the change that we're going to do today. We're going to change all of our IDEs so that they autosave files. We don't have to hit Control-S to save. They autosave. We're going to map Control-S to be commit. It pops up a little dialog box that asks you to enter the commit message. You type it, you hit enter. And whenever you do a rename, you're going to use Control-RM or whatever your IDE shortcut is. Everything else, do it as you did before. We're only making that change, right? We have recipes that are integrated. We have a Git repo named recipes, and it says, here's how we do these things, right? And you can go look and say, well, what we're doing is this recipe. And it wrote down that. And it has a little notes on how you do these things, right? Do those, right? And we make it trivial to adopt the tools separately from behaviors, right? So that you can use a tool in your old crappy way, and then you can start behaving in new ways with the new tool, right? So, for example, on this one, I tell people, use the Git, whenever you need to look up and understand what's going on in Git, what things are at, stop using the command line and doing git log, start looking in the IDE at the git log. A, the graph is more readable and intelligible, but B, it gets people using the IDE tool, right? So I just do those things, right? And that's gradualism, right? We have all of these 5 steps. And when we do that, thing after thing after thing, we can complete this tiny step in 2 days. And then we do another one in 2 days, and another one, and another one. And we get there. Last thing is integration. I am at time, but I'm going to talk very briefly about this, and we can have more conversation with those who want. To make it sticky, it's about expand, then integrate. It's about every time that you do an expansion, allow time for relaxation and integration. Right? So once you make a change, it will impact all the systems around. Take a pause, stop making changes, and allow those impacts to flow out naturally. And they will. And you'll modify this process. You'll modify your PR process. You'll modify the conversations that you have with managers around HR. Things will alter, right? And when they do, now you have an ecosystem that is stable again. Right? Then go ahead and make your next change. Once you have a stable ecosystem, any one thing that changes gets to fight the force of gravity. Your manager changes and they're suddenly no longer in favor of this thing. They get to fight the forces of gravity instead of you. So that's the key thing. We just want to extend the whole context, focus on fluency, right? Get uniformity. It's not about specialization. It's not about depth. It's about uniformity applied across the whole thing. Now, going forward, I recommend to you, here are 3 sorts of problems. We've gotten to the level of getting the idea, right? Showed you each of those ideas. I've shown you a recipe that you can try. That's the next level of learning. The 3rd level is practicing and failing. You know, if you want to know the levels that are below here, go look at the talk that Marian Hartman is going to give in a couple of hours, where she will talk about the levels of learning and how to do each of these very effectively. But these are the techniques that you want to use to get through those first couple of levels. And your next level is practice. And when you practice, you will fail a lot. So reach out to me. You can get me by email. You can get me by, I'll probably stay on the app, for the Craft app, for as long as that's still there. And you can get me there. Reach out to me, and I'll be happy to help you as you work through the first many failures. Thank you very much.